Thank you for joining me. With Mother's Day right around the corner, I thought a great project would be to make metal roses. So I'm going to bring you along with me and show you step by step on how I made these roses. My goal is by the end of this video, you will be able to design your own roses, cut them out, shape them, weld them together, and also to build a stand for your roses. I'm also going to show you how I painted these roses using a torch. So I hope you enjoy the video. If you have not already, please like the channel and subscribe. So let's get started. I am using 22 gauge steel for my rose. I started off drawing 6 circles. These circles are for the rose petals and also the sepal, which is a star shape at the bottom of the rose. I have a 2.5 inch circle which will have 3 petals. I have another 2.5 inch circle which is going to have 5 petals. I will have a 3.5, a 4 inch, and a 4.5 inch circle which all will have 6 petals. And finally I'll have a 3.5 inch circle which is for the sepal, which will have 5 points, like a star. In my final design I'm going to have 3 roses. Once I cut out the first rose design, I will use that design to trace out to make my other roses. I am using a pair of tin snips. They easily cut through the 22 gauge steel. With everything cut out, I'm going to use a chisel and a hammer to add texture to the rose petals. This is an important step, but this will give you the texture and the look of a real rose petal. The only thing you need to concentrate is the upper part of the rose. The lower part will be covered by the next section of petals. I have a crimp tool used for HVAC. This tool does an excellent job of adding shape to my rose petals. This is one done. Next thing to do is to repeat the process on the other rose petals. Now for the sepal, I'm going to also use the chisel and hammer. And I'm going to try to texture it so it appears to look like leaves. This is what it looks like when I'm finished. Next thing I do is use a screw and a nut, and I'm going to bolt everything together. I'm going to start off with the smallest and work my way to the largest of the rose petals. And the last will be the sepal on the very bottom. Then add the nut and tighten it down. Now I'm going to add shape to the flower. My advice is to clamp this down somehow to free up both of your hands. I am using a vise. The tools I'm going to use to shape the flower are a pair of needle nose pliers. I'm going to also use channel locks to help hold each of the pedestals in the upright position. Starting from the middle, take one of your rose petals, bring it up, and start curling it in nice and tight. Use the channel locks to help hold in place, and then you use the needle nose to start flaring out the top edge of that rose. Next, you take the next rose petal, bring it up, wrap it around the first rose petal that you bent. You're going to repeat the process with the channel locks and the needle nose pliers, shaping the rose petal and curling out the upper edge. You're going to repeat this process, working your way from the center to the outside of the flower. My suggestion is when you pick the next petal to use, it's going to be the opposite direction of the one you just did. When you go from row to row, use the needle nose pliers to line up the next row of rose petals that they line up with the seams of the rose you just shaped. Now that you have the idea of how to form the rose petals, I won't make you sit through the whole process. I'll move closer to the end so you can see the finished product. For the stem of the rose, I'm going to use 3/16 round rod. I'm going to use a hammer. I'm going to hammer in shape and texture to the stem. Each stem is going to be cut down to approximately 12 inches. Now for the leaves, I'm going to cut out the shape of the leaf on the 22 gauge steel. I'm using a Dremel drill with a cutoff tool, and I'm going to add texture to the edges of the leaves. Then after this, I'm going to use the hammer and chisel and add texture and make it look like a leaf. When I'm happy with all the texture added to the leaves, I will use the needle nose pliers and start rounding the edges and making bends to try to make the shape of a leaf. I decided to add thorns to my stem, so I grabbed 1/8 inch round rod, put a point on one end, and cut off about 1/4 of an inch. I made several of these. Using needle nose pliers, I welded it each one to the stems. The welder I'm using today is the YesWelder Flux 135 Pro. The 135 Pro is a 110 input voltage only. It's a 3-in-1 welder. It will do flux core MIG, lift TIG, and stick. It's perfect for beginners and excellent for small projects like this. In order to attach the leaves to the stem, I'm using 1/16 round rod. I'm welding it to the end of the leaves and adding shape and welding to the stem. With my stem cleaned up and ready to go, I need to cut off the ends of the screws I use to bolt the flowers together. Then I will weld the bolt on and weld it to my stem. I got the chance to try out this new YesWelder helmet. This is the YLG 1980. It is auto darkening. This helmet has excellent clarity. It's got the true color view, 180-degree view, just like my Aggressor helmet. But this helmet also has an LED light to light up your project. The battery in this helmet is rechargeable, so no more changing out the batteries. As always, if you have a question about today's project, or even about the tools used today, or if you have a suggestion about a future build, please let me know in the comments below. For each one of these roses, I added 2 to 3 leaves to the bottom, and I tried to do it randomly so they weren't exactly the same. Once I got all the thorns, the leaves, and the roses all welded up, I did clean up all my parts. The next thing that I did was create a base. For my vase base, I'm going to use 1/8 inch thick flat stock. I'm going to cut it 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. The tube itself on top is 1.5 inch square tubing by 4 inches. I centered the square tube to the base. I marked off the corners. I drilled through the base on each of the corners. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the square tube and I'm going to weld up from underneath so you see no welding. I used a piece of scrap steel to help with the lining up of the stem, plus also try to help contain some of the splatter. So I slid the rose through the square tubing, lined up the stem where my mark was, and I tacked it in place. I used one of my YesWelder C-clamps and held the square tube up to free up my hands, so I was able to fully weld this rose in place. With the first rose completely welded in place, everything else was nice and smooth. I would grab the next set of roses, Slide it through the tube, tack it in place, position it, make sure the square tube sat exactly where it needed to be on the base. Then I welded it fully in. And I repeated the process with, this, like I said, the second rose and then also the third rose. With all 3 roses welded in place, I'm able to assemble the vase. Using my YesWelder C-clamps, I lined up my base with this square tubing. Using the holes that I drilled out, I tack welded the bottom square tube and the base together. With the base welded up, you now have your roses completed. Next thing you can do is to finish the roses. If you like the steel look, then all you have to do is clear coat it. I've seen some people online paint the actual rose petals and leave the steel on the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a torch to add my color to my roses. What you do is you heat up the rose and you'll start seeing the metal color. The first color you're going to see is like an amber color. Then what you'll see is the blue and the purples come out. So once you see the color change, remove the heat. Give it a second, you'll start seeing the colors come out. Once you're happy with the colors you have, once it cools down, you want to clear coat it to hold on to those colors. Just to give you a warning, if you apply too much heat, the surface will go to like a gunstock gray. If you do this type of finish, you always want to keep your torch moving and don't apply too much heat in one area too long. And there you have it. It was a really fun project. Here's a close-up of my roses finished. It was an excellent Mother's Day gift. I'm going to give these to my wife for Mother's Day. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have not already, please like the channel and subscribe. I'll see you on the next video.